Hey everyone, get ready for a heart-pounding ride, because today I've uncovered 3 unbelievable stories that all take place during school lockdowns. These tales are intense, shocking, and absolutely gripping. You won't believe what happens next, so stay tuned. It was supposed to be an ordinary day. I was sitting in Mrs. Thompson's history class, doodling absent-mindedly in my notebook, when the loudspeaker crackled to life. Attention all students and staff. This is a lockdown. Please follow lockdown procedures immediately. The tone in Principal Harris's voice sent chills down my spine. This wasn't a drill. Mrs. Thompson quickly locked the door and motioned for us to get under our desks. We huddled together, the air thick with fear and uncertainty. The minutes ticked by, painfully, slowly. The silence was broken only by the occasional whisper and the rustle of clothes as someone shifted uncomfortably. Suddenly the lights flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. A few gasps echoed around the room. I felt a cold draft sweep through the room, and I shivered. The windows were closed. Where was it coming from? Out of nowhere, a faint tapping noise started. It was coming from the door. Tap, tap, tap. Each knock was slow and deliberate. My heart raced. Mrs. Thompson motioned for us to stay silent, her face pale and tense. Then the tapping stopped, replaced by a low, almost imperceptible whisper. "Let me in." The voice was eerie, sending a wave of panic through the class. We all exchanged terrified glances, hoping it was just our imaginations. A sudden loud bang on the door made us all jump. The door handle rattled violently, but it was locked tight. Whoever or whatever was on the other side was trying to get in. The banging grew more intense, the door shaking with each hit. And then, just as abruptly as it had started, the noise stopped. Silence engulfed the room once more. We barely had time to breathe a sigh of relief when we heard it, the sound of footsteps. Slow and methodical, moving down the hallway. "Don't move," Mrs. Thompson whispered. The footsteps grew fainter, and for a moment it seemed like the danger had passed. But then a scream echoed from down the hall, followed by more screams and the unmistakable sound of chaos. We could hear doors being thrown open, the terrifying sound getting closer and closer. We held our breath, praying it wouldn't reach us, but deep down, I knew we weren't safe. This was no ordinary lockdown. Something was terribly wrong, and it was only a matter of time before it found us. The final bell had just rung, and I was grabbing my things from my locker, eager to get home. That's when the announcement came. "Attention all students and staff. We are now in lockdown. This is not a drill. Please proceed to the nearest classroom or secure area immediately." I ducked into the nearest door, which led to the boys' locker room. A few other guys had the same idea, and we quickly locked the door behind us. The room was eerily silent except for our heavy breathing. Minutes turned into what felt like hours. We huddled together in the back, out of sight from the door. Then the power went out. The emergency lights flickered on, casting a dim, ghostly glow over the room. It was then that we heard it, the faint sound of footsteps echoing in the hallway. We all exchanged nervous glances. The footsteps stopped outside the locker room door, and then the handle turned. Slowly, deliberately, the door was locked, but the handle kept jiggling as if someone or something was trying to get in. Suddenly, there was a loud bang, and the door shook violently. We backed up further into the locker room, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The banging continued, more insistent with each hit. Then it stopped, and everything went silent again. That's when we heard the whispering. It was soft at first, barely audible, but it grew louder. A sinister, unintelligible murmur that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The temperature in the room plummeted, and I could see my breath misting in the cold air. One of the guys, Tim, pointed towards the showers. "Look," he whispered. We all turned and saw it. A dark, shadowy figure standing in the middle of the room, barely visible in the dim light. It was tall and thin, with glowing red eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. Panic set in, and we scrambled to find an escape. The figure started moving towards us, its footsteps echoing ominously on the tile floor. We tried the windows, but they were too small to climb through. The only way out was through the door, and whatever was on the other side. Desperation took over, and we decided to make a run for it. We charged towards the door, But as soon as we reached it, the figure vanished. The door swung open easily, and we spilled out into the hallway, breathless and terrified. The lockdown was lifted soon after, and the school was swarming with police. They said there had been a break-in, but no one could explain the shadowy figure we saw in the locker room. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that whatever it wasn't human, and it's still out there, waiting for its next chance to strike. The day began like any other, with the monotonous drone of the morning announcements echoing through the halls of Roosevelt High. I was in gym class, struggling to keep up with the warm-up exercises, when the principal's voice interrupted. "Students and staff, we are now in lockdown. This is not a drill. Please proceed to the nearest classroom immediately." Coach Miller herded us into the equipment room and locked the door. We crouched behind stacks of mats and crates, the cold concrete floor sending chills through my legs. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from a small barred window high on the wall. We waited in tense silence, the weight of the unknown pressing down on us. Suddenly we heard footsteps echoing through the gym. They were slow and deliberate, not at all like the hurried, frantic steps of teachers trying to ensure students' safety. "Stay quiet," Coach Miller whispered, his voice barely audible. The footsteps grew louder, and I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. The door handle jiggled, and we all froze. The door was locked, but it felt like a flimsy barrier against whatever was out there. Then the lights flickered and went out, plunging us into near darkness. My eyes struggled to adjust, but in the faint light from the window I saw something that made my blood run cold. A shadow, darker than the rest of the room, moved across the wall. It wasn't shaped like a person. It was elongated and twisted, like something out of a nightmare. It paused, as if sensing our presence. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. The shadow seemed to writhe and pulsate, and then it started to move again, seeping through the cracks around the door. Coach Miller grabbed a metal bat from the equipment pile, his face set in a grim mask of determination. "Stay behind me," he mouthed. The shadow slid under the door, and we watched in horror as it coalesced into a more defined shape. A tall, gaunt figure with hollow eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. It stood there, just inside the door, its gaze sweeping over us. My mind screamed to run, but my body was frozen in fear. The figure took a step towards us, and Coach Miller swung the bat with all his might. The bat passed right through the figure, as if it were made of smoke. The creature let out a bone-chilling screech, and the air grew unbearably cold. We huddled together, powerless against this supernatural intruder. The figure reached out a skeletal hand, and I felt a cold grip on my shoulder. My vision blurred, and the world around me faded to black. When I came to, the lights were back on, and the gym was filled with frantic teachers and police officers. They said the lockdown had ended, but I knew better. The shadow was gone, but its presence lingered, a dark stain on my memory. Whatever it was still out there, waiting.